Chapter 12, Combat Control School Demolitions, Land Navigation. After another week of class, the demolition phase was next. A week of classroom training, while in the mornings we got smoked in the pit. We carried the log to eat and learned the dangerous art of blowing things up. I found the class interesting. I never liked math, but I caught on to how to calculate a time fuse. Important for lighting a fuse and getting down range, and knowing exactly when it was going to ignite. It had to be precise, and the instructors didn't leave any room for error. We messed up the calculations a little bit, but got the hang of it. We blew up old washing machines, large chunks of metal, and even parts of old cars. We were taught different ways to set up the charges on our targets. The diamond charge, named because of its shape, basically twisted a piece of metal that was 3 inches thick in half, like a piece of bread. It was fun to see what kind of damage the demolitions would do, and we spent the entire week doing it. At the end of this phase of instruction, we threw live grenades. We stood behind a concrete barrier for protection. An instructor carefully monitored us as we pulled the pin and threw it. If we messed up, they hopefully would be there to help us. Although I did hear Sergeant Sampson say, "If you drop that grenade on the ground, I'm getting the fuck out of here. You'll be on your own." I found myself thinking ahead to land navigation during most of the demolition phase. It was a flaw that kept me on the edge of destruction and the type of training where you must be in the moment. During all the downtime in San Antonio, I thought about Hell Week because it seemed brutal and cones regularly returned to tell the horror stories. Yet more guys returned because of land navigation, because it was not just a gut check. You had to prove that you understood it out in the forest of Fort Bragg. I had a constant worry about airborne school, especially after meeting a cone with metal pins in his leg from a bad jump. And my concern was not unfounded. I actually broke my own leg. And now land nav was upon me, whether I liked it or not. I'd heard a lot about land navigation back at Lackland, how a lot of guys failed the practical portion of it. From my past experience in high school and college, I felt if anyone was going to fail, it'd be me. But there was always a possibility of failing out of anything during combat control school. But I'd made it up to that point. I had to recognize that. I paid close attention to the classroom portion of land nav, making sure I didn't miss a single detail. It made sense to me on paper and surprisingly simple, but I knew the real challenge would be applying it out in the heat with 100 pounds on my back. We went over how to read maps, plot a course, and keep a pace count with ranger beads. On the last couple of days of the classroom portion of land navigation, we went outside to the schoolhouse parking lot and did our pace for 100 meters to have a good idea of how many steps we took in 100 meters. We would use that out in the field, sliding a ranger bead down every 100 meters. Out in the field, we would use this pace count and slide a bead down for every 100 meters that we walked. 10 beads would equal 1 kilometer, or click, and some of our legs out in the field would be numerous clicks each, depending on the azimuth that was plotted on our map. We walked the distance several times out in the parking lot and got an idea of how many steps it took to walk it. Most of the time during land navigation, we would be counting steps in our head. During the land navigation classroom week, we continued to carry the large telephone pole to the chow hall and got smoked in the pit, but it became more of a routine. I was physically tougher than I'd ever been in my life, even though my body was being torn down. The mind games continued, though. I was racking up several letters of reprimand, or LORs, for some small things. It was like they were trying to build a case against everyone to remove us from the course. In fact, that's what they were doing. I knew a few guys that returned to Lackland from combat control school. They were showing a stack of papers in the office of all the things they'd fucked up. It was another pressure applied to us daily. I already had some for a dull knife, dirty knife, and unserviceable BDU pants. My pants got ripped at the crotch doing iron mics, hands behind the head and jumping into alternate lunges in the pit. The instructor swarmed me and asked me why I was wearing pants with a hole in them. There was no arguing or excuses. All I could say was, "Hoo-yah." The instructors explained the land navigation course. As they explained the length and difficulty of the course, I began to feel a spark of motivation. A readiness to tackle the event instead of dreading it. The best part about land navigation was that it was a solo event done by ourselves in the middle of nowhere. It was a situation that I felt comfortable with and thrived in. Our course was the same course used by the Army Special Forces, and it was known for being difficult. Being in the forest in North Carolina, there were special challenges in the terrain. It had low areas that were so thick it was nearly impossible to walk through. Every turn looked like the last turn you just made. Many people had gotten turned around and lost. On top of all this, it was July, so the summer heat was intense day and night. All my time spent out in the Tennessee woods would help me prepare for the challenging landscape of southern North Carolina. The course was out on Fort Bragg, and it was so large it would take all day to complete the practical test at the end of the week. There would be only 4 points on the test, but they were spread far apart. The points we navigated to would be at the intersection of dirt roads. A sign posted there would be the location and place to sign. They made it very clear in the class. Do not follow the roads to your points. We were told to plot out our azimuth on the map and walk to our destinations while navigating around the thick, impassable spots. Following the roads was a disqualification if we were caught. Inside of our rucks, we had a giant military GPS, which would be turned off. We could turn it on only if told to over the radio by the instructors, in a situation where we were lost or turned around. They would also know if it was turned on and would check, so that was not on my radar to even try and cheat that way. We carried our field rucks that had all of our gear needed for a week out in the woods that included the large radio and antennas that we'd use to check in at our assigned spots. They were larger than our weighted rucks, but they weighed a little less at around 60 to 65 pounds. But they were a lot larger and more bulky. We drove out to the course in the back of the large camouflage trucks, our packs full of gear, ready for the practical learning of the basic skill of land navigation. We had the tedious task of preparing everything for the instructors. Their ATVs, gear, and our gear was all prepared over the weekend. Time off was few and far between anymore. For time out in the field, the rules were the same for our mock weapons, no more than arm's length even while sleeping. As we set up the camp, radios, and all the details for the week, our 35-pound vests were on and weapons nearby. Another rule to add to everything else was our faces had to be fully camouflaged at all times. We were required to check. As we sweated it off, we continually reapply it. Along with everything else in our vests and rucks, we had a small mirror packed for shaving and checking our camo. I had brought plenty of grizzly mint, and I was back to chewing hardcore despite the week break during Hell Week. Our meals for the week would be meals ready to eat, or MREs, which I never felt like eating because of the heat. But they were not so bad. We slept under camouflage ponchos that we carried along with us. With the area set up that afternoon, we began our training. The gear in our rucks was a lot to keep up with. They looked like they were about to burst at the seams. The entire week was going to be spent carrying the large canteens full of water, 60-pound rucks, and 35-pound vests on our chest. But I was still glad I got rid of that alternate weapon. The heat of the summer made the days walking around the woods learning to navigate nothing short of miserable. It was like Hell Week all over again, only now we had to think and learn. We practiced applying the information learned in the classroom, like plotting a point and navigating to it using our pace count. Like the classroom, the art of navigating was making sense. But being tired, my soul was exposed more than ever. As I stopped for a moment, I pulled out a big wad of grizzly mint and looked around at the dirt roads. I realized that all the dirt roads were on the maps. If I followed them, I could take a mental break in the course and not worry about the stress of failing land navigation. I actually understood how to do it the right way, but I did not trust myself enough to be alone and pass the test. As the next day slowly moved on, the thought of using the dirt roads became my plan without even realizing it. I was so exhausted and hungry, I didn't remember deciding to cheat, but it was my default mode throughout life. I had never spent an entire full day with a ruck on my back until Tuesday that week. The weight of the pack cut into my shoulders, the desire to stop moving was strong. Using a map and compass did distract me from the pain, but not much. There were only MREs to eat out in the field, but the heat and humidity suppressed my appetite, making me weak. My body fat dropped to an all-time low every time I went out into the field. I was only hungry for peanut butter or some kind of candy. By midday Tuesday, I wondered if my body would be able to get through until Thursday, the day of the practical test. Friday was reserved for anyone who failed. I didn't want to do it twice, even further confirmation for trying my cheat method. I was justifying it, like I would later to do with tobacco after I tried to quit. The urge came over me so strongly, before I knew it, I was in the gas station buying another can, later feeling guilty. Throughout the long days carrying the rucks around on our backs, the only relief in sight was being under the poncho later that night in the summer heat, trying to avoid mosquitoes. Even though it seemed super muggy and miserable, it wasn't hard for me to sleep at night, because after the long day of humping the weight around and then cleaning up the camp, getting our gear ready for the next day, and taking care of our feet, we didn't get to sleep until the early morning hours. But we were up before the sun rose every morning. In the mornings, my feet were shredded and my body felt so fatigued that I didn't see how I'd get it going for another day. Before I drifted off into dreamless sleep during the uncomfortable humid nights, I would think about the final evaluation coming up that Thursday, and what was constantly repeated to us during the classroom portion. Do not follow the roads, but crossing is okay. You must be 100 meters off the dirt roads at all times. I'll just act like I'm crossing the road if they catch me on their ATVs. It was going to be easy. Before sleep finally took me over that Tuesday night, a random instruction from the classroom ran through my mind. If you see railroad tracks, you're fucked. They are way outside the boundaries of the course. Wednesday was more of the same, endless walking, humping gear around like a mule. We continued our practice with pace count and learning the basics of navigating with a map and compass. Everything began to feel extra heavy, even my large canteens full of water. Like during Hell Week, my body had adjusted and kept moving without me having to give the process much thought. I was extra hungry that day because the MRE I had the night before didn't have much that I liked in it, and I was unable to trade for the unusually hard bread and peanut butter. The macaroni and cheese didn't look appealing, especially using the pasta heated up. I was tired of sweating. I sweated constantly with that familiar ammonia smell, and I had to keep reapplying my camouflage to my face every hour or so. I ate some peanut butter, some crackers, and a few cookies the night before, hardly enough to keep up with the demands of the course, but I kept moving. That afternoon, we were told to pull out our large GPS from our rucks and get ready for GPS navigation, which I thought would be a nice change from the old map and compass technique. They told us to enter a point into the archaic-looking piece of equipment, much larger than the first cell phones back in the 1980s like my father had. And we were paired into two-man teams. I was paired with A1C Angelo. He was a large guy who stood about 6'3" and solid as a rock. He looked like a giant Indian chief with short hair. He seemed built for that type of work, and I only hoped I could keep up with him. After entering the point in the GPS, my motivation and drive sank way down low. The point was almost 10 miles away, and we'd been on the move with our gear since we'd arrived at the navigation area. So following the old GPS to some random point carrying the heavy gear seemed ridiculous. The instructions were simple enough. Follow the GPS to the destination programmed. And like every event, don't be last. We filled our canteens and started our long walk to our destination. Our rucks always seemed like everything wouldn't fit after shoving and packing our sleeping gear from the night before. Angelo and I barely said a word as we followed the GPS wherever it led us. Only the familiar sound of our boots hitting the ground and our old creaky gear on our backs filled the humid air. The GPS Ruck seemed like a sick game, probably just to tire us out before our final test the next day. It led us through many low areas that were super thick. Only the familiar sound of our boots hitting the ground and our old creaky gear on our backs filled the humid air. The GPS Ruck seemed like a sick game, probably just to tire us out before our final test the next day. It led us through many low areas that were super thick, areas that I made a point to avoid in the last couple of days. As we walked through the thick wall of brush, I walked behind Angelo like he was some kind of superhuman. He plowed through the thick brush, thorns, and vines like a bulldozer. Being on his team seemed to work in my favor. About 5 miles into the search for a random point, our heads hung low as we tried to tackle another low area. Angelo began to plow through the thick, almost jungle-like growth again, but he got hung up and came to a stop. "Fuck!" he shouted, and tried to move. He seemed stuck. After being still for a few moments, he tried to move again, but thick vines were caught around his ankle area. He fell to the ground and sounded like a huge pile of bricks. Falling down sucked because it took precious energy to get back up with all the weight. "Ah!" he screamed, so loud it echoed in the distance. I'm sure some of the others heard it. "Fuck this shit!" Angelo had lost it. I couldn't blame him. I felt the same way. After a bit, I tried to encourage him to get up. I pulled and tugged on the over 200-pound guy and 100 pounds of gear, using more of my precious energy. The grown man looked like he was about to cry. I stayed silent. I understood exactly what he felt. After he got to his feet, he started moving again, and we continued on our useless journey. The walk went on into the evening and then night as the instructors on our radios told us to hurry up. They asked each team where they were and tried to track them. We went up hills and back down into low brush areas, and none of it made us come to a complete stop again, but it slowed us tremendously. After we made it to the point that was lit with glow sticks, we piled into the 2-ton camouflage diesel trucks. But we were informed the day was not over. We were going to do night navigation. I couldn't believe it. We had our evaluation in the morning, and we would be up half the night doing more training. I felt like Angelo in the woods on the verge of tears and wanted to yell out, "Fuck this shit," and everything about it. By the time we made it to the location to start the night navigation and briefed on the exercise, it was 8:30 p.m. That exercise wasn't graded, so all I needed to do was turn my brain off and roll through the motions. With glow sticks on our rucks and specific points to navigate to, we set out into small teams and walked around like zombies in the forest. The moon was out almost full. That helped our time out there. It felt much different than the day navigation, almost like a pilot flying with instruments, because there was no help from the dark landscape that surrounded us. We were going to use the skill during the final mission phase, but I just followed the team around in a daze. I let them do most of the work. The old Kevin was never too far away when stress and exhaustion reached its peak. Under our ponchos for the night, it was well past midnight, and we had to be up at 5 the next morning. I finally settled down, but the monkey on my back, the evaluation, weighed me down and kept me awake later than I should have been. I hope I wouldn't get lost or turned around. The event that got a lot of cones removed was upon me. The ride to the evaluation course in the trucks was solid the next morning. Not much talking or joking around the back. We were already sweating from the muggy morning air. There wasn't many clouds over the sandy pine forest, but it was summer, so a pop-up rain shower was possible and welcomed. Names were called at each location the truck stopped. We couldn't see where we were because of the canopy that covered the back of the truck. Not that it mattered. Once we were dropped off, there would be a sign with a map grid of our current location and where our next point was located. Beside the sign, there were jerry cans to refill the canteens. The first point for me may be the third point for someone else, as everyone was on their own. Like promised in the classroom, my drop-off point was at the intersection of 2 dirt roads. As the giant truck drove off with my teammates, it became quiet, and a realization that I was all alone set in. I felt energized by the feeling of being all alone. I quickly knelt down on my sore knees and plotted out my first point. I looked at the map and immediately looked for roads that led to the next point. I spotted a road that led from my destination and back to my current one. I was in business. I made the quick decision to disregard the warnings and follow the roads. With a big wad of chew in my mouth, I smiled at the thought of finishing early by finally getting a chance to cheat the course that had nearly killed me with the burden of everything being insanely difficult. As I took in the scenery of the sandy dirt roads and the aroma of the pine trees, I set off like I was on a nature hike with 100 pounds of old gear. The heat already caused me to be drenched in sweat, but my energy levels felt pretty good as I walked to my first point of the day. The gear was beginning to feel very heavy, but by now I was used to the feeling and was able to walk a good while before I sat down for a map check. My pace count seemed to go well, but something seemed off as I looked at the map. There were dirt roads everywhere, so many that a wrong turn seemed almost guaranteed without careful attention. I heard the noise of an engine in the distance. It got louder very quickly. The ATV was coming down the dirt road I was on. I folded the map and turned to walk into the woods with my back to the road. I remember the rule that we had to be at least 100 meters from the dirt roads, and less crossing, of course. So as the ATV came into view, I turned into the woods like I was crossing the road. A Polaris ATV with an instructor on it blazed down the road, leaving a huge dust trail behind it. Damn, that was close, I thought. I heard some of my teammates check into their first points over my handheld radio in my vest, but I was still walking around hunting for my first point, unsure if I was close or not. I knew if I took the dirt roads it would take me longer, but by afternoon I still hadn't even hinted that I was close. It was starting to cloud up and look like rain was possible, as I started to panic. I knew I was close to the point, or so I thought. I started to walk around the area, checking the terrain and roads that looked similar to the map, but no dice. Fatigue set in as my adrenaline had been working overtime as I was running around in an all-out panic searching for a sign. As I sat down to look at the map again, I heard A1C Feldman checking in on his radio. He was a religious guy that refused to curse and was heavily involved in church before the Air Force. "Feldman, what do you need?" I heard the instructors ask over my staticky radio. "I'm stuck in brush, and I'm exhausted, and I cannot move anymore." "Where are you?" Then I heard nothing but static. And then I heard him clearly. "I don't know." He eventually had to pull out his GPS so they could find him and get him out. I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't calling anybody. I was going to die out there. With my never-quit attitude, I didn't let the fact that I was almost lost stay in my mind. I thought if I just kept running around and exhausting myself, I was sure that I'd eventually find the first point. I studied the map and walked around where I thought the point should be, but nothing turned up. I eventually began to accept the possibility that I was lost and may fail the first evaluation. To make the day even better, the sky had turned dark, thunder rumbled in the distance, and lightning flashed in the sky. I stopped and fell on my ass. I didn't want to stop moving because I did not want to think about my situation. I didn't want to think about that I'd fucked up the evaluation because I cheated. I told myself the whole land navigation test couldn't possibly have been a pass or fail evaluation. There was no way the instructors would require us to find 4 points in one day, especially when I witnessed how far they were apart. Thoughts of going back to Lackland, my father's, and my own disappointment began to creep into my mind. But then I heard something in the distance. It sounded like a horn. It was a train. At first I thought nothing of it, but I soon realized I shouldn't be hearing a train. How far away was it, I thought? Train horns were loud. It could be possibly 10 to 20 miles away. But the horn got louder, and I began to hear the rumble of a train. I forced myself up to go investigate, using every ounce of energy I had to get to my shredded feet. I looked down a dirt road. The area I was in was more clear than the dense forest I'd been navigating earlier, like it was recently cleared out at some point. From my right to left, about 100 yards down the road, I saw a train go rolling by, the loud horn taunting me. As I watched it rumble down the tracks, I felt my eyes start to well up with tears. I saw the tracks. Hell, I even saw the goddamn train. I was fucked. I tried to fight down the feelings of disappointment and bewilderment as the rain came down from the sky. There was a positive that came from seeing the train. I wouldn't have noticed the tracks without it. I knew exactly where I was because the tracks were on my map, although I cringed when I saw how far away I'd strayed. A new sense of hope came over me. Although I didn't want to feel the heavy weight of the gear on my shredded feet, I plotted my long journey to my first point. It was 14:30. There still may have been a chance. Of course, I still followed the roads, and it took twice as long to reach the first point than shooting a direct course, but I finally made it. By 1845, the instructors announced for everyone to pull out their GPSs and call out and give their coordinates. The evaluation was finished at 1900. Many of us hadn't made it back to all 4 points. As we loaded into the back of the trucks, everyone looked like shells of themselves. They were lifeless. I still held out hope that the instructors would tell us we all made it, and that we didn't have to make it to all 4 points, especially in that hot July heat. "Hope you all are ready to do it again tomorrow," the instructor said as we loaded into the truck. He sounded dead serious. The instructors weren't playing any games. There would be a retest the next day. We had another chance to do it all over again. If we failed, we'd be done. If we did happen to fail again, there was a small chance we can go back to Lackland and wait for a new class. But I couldn't imagine starting the entire school from day one again. That night, I was nervous. It was late, but no one was asleep yet. Most of us were in our heads about the brutal realization of the next day. Only a few people passed the first evaluation, and the heat of the day, combined with the knowledge of how difficult the course actually was, made the mood dark. My feet were absolutely messed up. When I got up to take a leak late that night, I could barely walk. It was the early hours of the next morning, so I thought I was the only one awake. All I could think about was doing the same course all over again with all that gear on my back. I could barely walk over to the edge of the tree line to take a piss because of the sharp pain in my tender feet. There was a glimmer of hope. 2 of the officers and 3 non-commissioned officers, or NCOs, complained about their feet so much a nurse was coming out to check everyone's feet in the morning. Maybe we could get out of the retest, at least for a while. It seemed heinous to make us do it all over again. Over half the class failed, most from heat, but mine was for getting lost. I was reminded many times by the instructors, if you're going to be stupid, you better be hard. I grunted as I laid back down on my sleeping bag. I heard an NCO call my name quietly in the darkness. He was a teammate that I nicknamed Count. I called him Count because 2 teeth were pointed inward at the top, making them look pointed. Along with his large pointed nose, the name seemed to suit him perfectly. I didn't call him that when I spoke to him, but I did refer to him as Count when I described my experiences back home to my friend. "How are you doing, McDonald?" Count asked faintly. I couldn't see him through the darkness. "My feet are fucked," I replied back. All I could picture in the darkness was that blue-faced character from Sesame Street that would count. The Dracula. 1, ah. 2, ah. In an exaggerated, dramatic tone, Count replied back from the darkness. "Man, mine are too." I heard him laugh, which made me do the same. "You'll crush it tomorrow, man. You're a beast." Hearing that funny tone in the darkness made me laugh, and it was kind of what I needed that night. I was feeling a sense of panic and out-of-control thoughts that night. Hearing that crazy, familiar voice in the darkness really eased my mind. The humid air became quiet again, and I drifted off to sleep. Early in the morning, as the sun was beginning to peer through the wooded pine trees surrounding the camp, a medical team examined everyone's feet. I thought for sure they would say mine were fucked and let the instructors know. The pain was intense, even when I was sitting down. I didn't look when the young female nurse carefully examined my feet. They went quietly down the line without saying much of anything, so it was hard to tell what they really thought. The instructors waited quietly at the perimeter of the camp. The medical team spoke quietly to the instructors, just out of reach for me to hear. It seemed like their conversation lasted forever. Occasionally they glanced over at us, but they never looked directly at me. That's not good, I thought. After the medical team left, the instructors made their way over to us and finally gave us some news. "Some of you will not do the retest today. You can do it again at the end of tactics." Tactics was the next phase, so that would give Andy Cohn the opportunity of a couple of weeks' time before the retest. I was hoping for that. Part of me did not want it hanging over my head for the next few weeks, but an even bigger part of me did not want to go out there again, ever. The instructors began to call out the names of the cones whose feet were too badly damaged to continue. As I waited for the names to be called, I began to wonder if our feet were thoroughly checked out, because they barely even looked at mine. As each name was called, I knew I was going out again that day. It wasn't hard to recognize that all the names called for the later retest were NCOs and officers, so Count and all the high-ranking cones would get a break. I was going to have to find a way to do the course over again that day. I decided to speak up. "Hoo-yah, Sergeant! My feet are bad. I'm not sure they're going to hold up," I pleaded with an instructor without even giving it much thought. "Get your ass in the truck, McDonald," he said with a grin that was so slight I could have imagined it. I had no choice. As I walked up to the back of the 2-ton truck, the instructor revved the diesel engine, blowing a huge cloud of smoke in my face. The smell reminded me of my father's tractor. I took a breath of the smoke, drawing in as much as I could. "You're the man," Count said, as I made my way into the back of the truck with all the other unlucky low-ranking cones. "Fuck you," was all I could think. After being dropped off again, I began my journey. It was a sunny, hot, and muggy morning, like the ones I played in with so much energy as a child. I stuck a wad of grizzly mint in my mouth and started with one foot in front of the other. But the pain was almost unbearable. At that moment, all my hopes seemed to plummet. My feet were on fire for the first 15 minutes of my walk, then they went numb. I was glad. My feet felt like the first 20 minutes of the course for the entire time. I'd have probably quit. My motivation returned a little as I kept walking. I was not learning from my past mistake of following the roads. I didn't trust myself enough to do it the correct way. So instead of finishing in 5 or 6 hours, the course was going to take about 12 the entire time. Hopefully no more than that. Unlike the day before, I was finding the points. It took a long time, but I made it to 2 of them without getting turned around. On the 3rd leg, I was lost again, although I was too exhausted to really care. I wanted to dump the ruck full of shit in my vest and strip down to my t-shirt. My legs didn't want to move. I was taking more and more breaks just sitting down. The amount of fortitude it took to get back up was astronomical. I was confused again, looking for the third point. After walking in a circle for about 30 minutes, I saw a figure walking around the brush. It was another cone. Airman Hollister, a big guy from Wisconsin, was standing there staring at me when I walked up to him. Talking to each other was banned, and he looked hesitant. "You're lost, eh?" he said in a thick accent. "You know where we are?" I asked. He pointed at the map. I was a few clicks off. It made sense to me after seeing his reference. We whispered back and forth for a minute, wished each other good luck, and I was on my way. Toward the afternoon, I was having trouble continuing at all. Even after a long break sitting down, I had made it to 3 points, but it was 1,700. I only had 2 hours to find the last one. I had just left my third point 20 minutes before. When I realized I might not make it, a sense of urgency created much-needed adrenaline for my body. I kept moving. I didn't want to stop again. Around 18:30, I was confident I knew where I was, but the dirt road I had followed seemed to me like it was way too long. But I followed it anyway, frantically looking at my watch. Every time I thought I'd experienced the most exhaustion or pain that combat control school had to offer, there was something coming next to prove me wrong. I thought Hell Week was my limit, but land navigation took the pain and suffering to another level. In the final hours of my retake, I reached a point where my body did not want to function anymore. I was focused on making the final point, running off adrenaline, but I was slowing down to a crawl. After almost 12 hours of moving, my body was telling me that it was done. Like a dream, I tried to move, but my legs wouldn't. With 30 minutes to go, I stopped and went down on my ass. On the side of the dirt road, I sat in the soft sand. Not making the time limit and going back to Texas was all I could think about. I drank some water and tried to motivate myself to get my broken body moving again. It really came down to the last 20 minutes. I had to get up. My ruck felt like it weighed a ton, and my legs felt like they were made of rubber. I took the fake M4 and stuck the barrel into the sand to help my body get off my ass. It sank down in the sand, and I laughed when I saw it. Good way to treat my weapon, I thought. I let out a scream that came from deep within. It was loud and surprised me. It felt good to let out the building frustration of the entire course. I heard my scream echo and then back to silence. Only the occasional voice or the static on the team radio is all I heard. I barely made it to my feet. I didn't plan on sitting back down. It took too much energy to get on my feet, and I couldn't stand much longer either. Just the weight of the gear was becoming too much. I began to jog. For some odd reason, it seemed easier than walking because it made my feet even more numb. I forced my body to keep going. It was an internal struggle each step. My brain was battling my body again. The weight of the ruck tearing in my shoulders through my sweaty BDUs. My mouth was hanging open like a zombie, and my feet felt like they were asleep. I just kept running. Then I saw a glimmer of hope. I saw the road curve around just like on my map. The sun was going down behind the pine forest, allowing me to see the white van through the trees. I recognized it. It was 18:55, so I picked up my pace even more. As I rounded the corner, I saw my teammates standing there along with an instructor. They all began to yell, "Hurry, McDonald! You're here! Just keep going!" Even the instructor was yelling. All the pain and suffering left my body, and I picked up the pace. I made it to the finish within 2 minutes. 2 minutes was all I had to spare. The cheering got louder as I approached the final intersection. I made it. I felt like I had gone through hell and back. Walking on feet I thought were useless before I started the day. I knew I looked like hell. I saw it on the instructor's face. I fell on my ass again one final time for the day. My teammates helped me pull off my gear. You made it with 2 minutes to spare, McDonald. 2 fucking minutes. It was the first time I'd seen an instructor at that school look at me with excitement and encouragement. It was like the final minutes of some sports game. I used to love baseball when I was a kid, but at that time I despised sports. I thought it was a waste of time. That was life or death to me. At the point I'd realized that training had drilled in my head that I would die before I'd quit. My desire to prove something to my family back home and myself, combined with the intense training I was receiving, was turning me into some kind of warrior that would die before he quits. It was a strange phenomenon. I was completing things I didn't think I could do and continuing on, and somehow I was motivated to do even more pain later in the future.